Nobody talks about what it costs to stand still. Not the standing itself. The boots, the wool coat in July heat, the jaw locked so tight your back teeth ache by noon. That part you learn to carry. What nobody tells you is the other thing. The watching, the seeing everything and being required, by oath and uniform and 300 years of protocol, to say nothing. Sergeant Edmund Harrow had been saying nothing for 19 years. He'd watched kings. He'd watched a funeral that stopped a country cold. He'd watched men in expensive suits whisper things in hallways that made his stomach turn to concrete. And he had stood there, spine straight, eyes front, because that was the job. That was the honor of it, supposedly. He believed that. For a long time, he genuinely believed that. The morning it ended began like every other morning. Grey London pressing itself against the palace windows. The smell of rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Harrow took his post at 0600, same corridor he'd walked 1,000 times, outside the East Wing conference room where the Queen's morning briefings ran. He wasn't supposed to hear. The door wasn't supposed to be cracked open 2 inches at the hinge because someone on the inside had hung a coat on the handle and pushed it almost but not quite shut. He heard anyway. The Veterans Housing Initiative, delay it. A pause. Papers shuffling. Delay it until after the Commonwealth Summit. We don't want that conversation running parallel to the trade negotiations. It muddies the optics. He knew the voice. Of course he knew the voice. 19 years. What he didn't know, what cracked something open in his chest right there in that corridor at 0612 on a Tuesday, was that he'd been at the Veterans Housing Consultation 3 weeks prior. Not as a guard. As a brother. His younger brother Callum, 2 tours of Afghanistan. A back that didn't work right anymore. Living in a flat with black mold up the bathroom wall because the waiting list for supported housing ran 4 years long. Callum had sat in that consultation room and talked about 4 years like it was a geological era, like he'd accepted that his life was the kind of thing that got delayed. Harrow had stood in the back of that room and felt something he hadn't let himself feel in 19 years. He felt it again now. It moved through him differently this time. Not grief. Not the hot, embarrassing thing that grief was. This was colder. More architectural, like a wall inside him that had been load-bearing for 2 decades had just, quietly, without drama, decided it was done. He stood there for the remaining 4 hours of his shift. Eyes front, spine straight, jaw tight, and, the whole time, that thing moved through him. He didn't go home after his shift. He went to Callum's flat in Lewisham. 3rd floor, lift broken since December, the stairwell smelling of other people's dinners, and something underneath that nobody named directly. Callum answered the door in a tracksuit he'd clearly slept in. 41 years old, and moving like someone twice that, favoring his left side the way he always did when the weather was cold and damp, which in London meant most of his life now. Ed. Not surprised. Not anything in particular. You look like someone reversed a car over your morning. Can I come in? Callum stepped aside. The flat was tidy in the way that people who have very little make things tidy. Everything in its exact place, because there wasn't room for anything to be otherwise. A single mug on the draining board. A library book on the table beside a notepad with a list on it that Harrow didn't read, but registered as the kind of list that itemized things like electricity and groceries with amounts next to them. He sat at the kitchen table. Callum put the kettle on without asking. That was the Harrow family's entire emotional vocabulary, the kettle going on. You were upset, the kettle went on. Someone had died, kettle. You hadn't spoken in 3 months, and one of you showed up at the door looking like road damage, kettle. Tell me about the housing list, Harrow said. Callum's back was to him. A small pause in the way he reached for the mugs. What about it? Current position. Ed, current position, Cal. Callum turned around. He had their mother's eyes, which was the kind of observation that arrived at inconvenient moments and didn't leave quickly. 347, he said. Was 312 last month. They added a new tranche to the list. 347. Harrow looked at the mug being set in front of him. He looked at the notepad with the list of numbers. He looked at his brother's hands around his own mug, the left one, the one that had stopped closing all the way properly after Hellman, gripping the ceramic with the concentrated care of someone who'd learned to compensate. I heard something today, Harrow said. Callum waited. At the palace. Still waiting. The Veterans Housing Initiative. They're delaying it. After the Commonwealth Summit. He stopped, because putting it into plain language made it worse somehow, made it a smaller and stupider thing than the weight it was actually carrying. For optics. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bus changed gear on the street below, a sound like something mechanical sighing. Right, Callum said. Just that. Right. the flattest, most exhausted syllable in the English language, deployed by a man who had learned that outrage was a luxury with a cost he couldn't keep affording. That was the moment, not the corridor at 0612. This, Harrow's brother saying right in a voice that had already made peace with it before the sentence was finished. I'm going to do something, Harrow said. Callum looked at him across the table. Really looked, the way brothers do when they're measuring whether the person sitting opposite them is still the one they grew up with or has become something they need to worry about. What kind of something? Harrow wrapped both hands around his mug. The kind that ends my career. A long silence. Callum set his mug down, rubbed his face with both hands, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite anything else. Mum would tell you not to, he said. Mum's not here. No. A pause. She's not. They sat with that for a moment. The rain outside finally, making up its mind. She'd also, Callum said slowly, looking down at his mug. She'd also tell you that she raised 2 boys, and she wanted at least one of them to come out of it with his backbone still attached. Harrow looked at his brother. His brother looked back. Right, Harrow said. He wrote it by hand. Not because he was sentimental about handwriting or because he thought it would matter symbolically. He wrote it by hand because every time he tried to type it, his fingers moved too fast, and the words came out in the wrong order, and he needed to feel the resistance of the pen slowing him down. He needed the sentence to cost him something in the making of it. He rewrote it 6 times. The first version was too angry. It read like a man who'd been holding something for 19 years and had finally dropped it on someone's foot, technically accurate, but ugly in the way of things that are purely discharge. The second version was too careful. Too many subordinate clauses. Too much throat clearing before the point. His CO at Sandhurst used to say that a sentence with 3 qualifiers is a sentence that doesn't believe in itself. He deleted the whole thing and started again. By the 5th version, he was somewhere in the vicinity of the truth. By the 6th, he had it. To Her Majesty Queen Camilla, I write this in full awareness of what it will cost me. And I write it anyway because I have finally concluded that the cost of not writing it is higher, though that cost will be paid by men who cannot afford it. I have served the crown for 19 years. I have considered this service the central fact of my adult life. I do not write to diminish that service or to repudiate the institution I have represented. I write because 3 weeks ago I attended a veterans housing consultation in Lambeth on behalf of my brother, Corporal Callum Harrow, retired, 2 tours of active service, currently position 347 on the supported housing waiting list. This morning I was present, unintentionally, for a discussion in which that initiative was described as an optics problem to be managed around a trade summit. My brother said, right, when I told him. He said it the way a man says it when he has already, at some earlier point, accepted that this is how things go. That acceptance, that specific, quiet, completely reasonable acceptance, is what I cannot stand. I am not naive about the mechanics of governance. I am not writing to accuse you personally of cruelty. I am writing to tell you what it looks like from where I stand, which is directly outside the room where these decisions are made, in a uniform that says the Crown and I are the same thing. I am no longer able to stand there in good conscience. With respect, Sergeant Edmund Harrow Coldstream Guards. 19 years service, he didn't send it through channels. He didn't post it, didn't email it to a private secretary, didn't hand it to his CO, and let the institution decide what to do with it. He walked it to the palace himself on a Thursday morning, not in uniform, civilian clothes, the gray coat that had seen better decades. And he handed it directly to the duty officer at the visitor's entrance and said, "For Her Majesty's office. Personal correspondence. My name is on it." The duty officer, young, uncertain, trained to receive things and ask no questions, took it. Harrow walked away. He got 3 blocks before his phone rang. Blocked number. He answered it. Sergeant Harrow. A voice he didn't recognize. Clipped, institutional, not hostile but not warm. "We'd like you to come back." "I've just left." "Yes, we're aware. We'd still like you to come back." He stood on the pavement outside a dry cleaner's. A woman with a pushchair navigated around him without looking up. A pigeon investigated something near the curb with the focused dedication of a professional. "Has she read it?" he asked. A pause. Fractionally longer than a denial would require. "Please come back to the building, Sergeant." He was taken to a room he'd never been in before. Not a waiting room. He knew waiting rooms, had stood outside them for nearly 2 decades. This was smaller, more interior, the kind of room that existed between the official rooms, that didn't appear on any map of the building that tourists or journalists ever saw. 2 chairs, a table, a window onto a courtyard where a gardener was doing something methodical with a barrow. He waited 22 minutes. He counted, from habit. The door opened. He stood up. Automatically, without deciding to, 19 years of it in the muscles. She looked smaller in person than ceremony made her. That was always the thing nobody said. That the people who occupied enormous symbolic space were, underneath the occasion, just people who had to fit through doorways and find chairs that didn't put their back out. She sat. She gestured at his chair. He sat. She had his letter in her hand. Handwritten, 6 drafts condensed into 1 page, his slightly cramped script in blue ink. She put it on the table between them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Your brother, she said. Callum. Yes, ma'am. 2 tours. Helmand and Kandahar. The second one is where his back. He stopped. He hadn't planned to say more than was in the letter. Yes. 2 tours. She looked at the letter. Not at him. At the letter, as though she was reading something in it she'd missed the first time. You said, she said slowly, that you're no longer able to stand there in good conscience. Yes. Stand where exactly? Outside the room? In the uniform? In the institution? It was a real question. He could hear that it was a real question, not a cross-examination, not an attempt to find the edge of what he meant so it could be managed. She genuinely wanted the precise geography of what he could no longer occupy. He thought about it honestly. All 3, he said. But, the uniform first. Because the uniform is the part that faces outward. The part other people see and make conclusions from. A long silence. The gardener in the courtyard had moved to a different section. Whatever methodical thing he was doing it with the slow, absorbed attention of someone who had no awareness of what was happening 8 meters away through a window. I knew about the delay, she said. He didn't respond. I was told it was a scheduling matter. A question of sequencing and messaging. She paused. I am now wondering how many other things I've been told are scheduling matters. Harrow looked at her hands, which were folded on the table. Not clenched. Not loose. The precise arrangement of someone who is holding themselves to a particular stillness. I can't answer that, ma'am, he said. No. A breath. I don't suppose you can. She picked up the letter, held it for a moment, set it back down. You said you wrote this knowing what it would cost you. Yes. And you wrote it anyway. Yes. She looked at him then, not the way people in her position usually looked at people in his, which was the practiced warmth of acknowledgement without real seeing. She looked at him the way his brother had looked at him across the kitchen table, taking the actual measure of the person. I need you to tell me something honestly, she said. Ma'am, is this, she touched the letter lightly, 1 finger at the corner. Is this about your brother? Or is it about something larger than your brother? He didn't answer immediately. He gave it the weight it deserved. Both, he said. It started with Callum. But, the reason I couldn't not write it, the reason 6 drafts wasn't enough to talk myself out of it, is that Callum is 347. And, I don't know the names of the other 346. But they said right too. In some kitchen somewhere. They all said right. Silence. The gardener disappeared around a corner of the courtyard. The barrow left alone in the middle of the path. I see, she said. And, he believed, sitting in that small interior room between the official rooms, that she did. The story broke on a Friday. Not because Harrow leaked it. He didn't. He had handed a letter to a duty officer and walked away. And, somewhere in the mechanical inevitability of institutions, and the people who watched them, the story had found its own exit. By 9 a.m. it was on 3 outlets. By noon it was everywhere, wearing the headline that editors decided best fit the shape of it. Palace Guard breaks 19-year silence. Writes T.O., Queen over veterans housing delay. His phone stopped being usable as a phone around 9:30. He turned it face down on the kitchen counter and made toast. The toast burned slightly at one edge because his toaster had always had a hot spot on the right side that he'd never bothered to account for and had never bothered to fix. He ate it standing at the counter and listened to the building. His upstairs neighbor's television. A dog 2 floors up. Traffic below with its ordinary impatient rhythm. Nobody was coming through the door to arrest him for something that wasn't a crime. He knew that. He reminded himself of it anyway. The formal consequences arrived by Monday. He was placed on administrative leave pending a conduct review. Not dismissal, not immediately, not yet, because dismissal would require a finding, and a finding would require a hearing, and a hearing would be a public document. The institution was moving carefully, which was both its nature and, right now, probably also in his favor without it meaning to be. His CO called him personally. Lieutenant Colonel Graves, 26 years in, a man with the face of someone who'd seen a great deal and concluded that most of it was outside his operational parameters. Harrow, he said, I'm not going to ask you what you were thinking, sir. Because I think I know what you were thinking, and I don't want it on record that I said that. Sir. A pause. Your brother, Graves said. How is he? It wasn't a question that fit inside the phone call they were supposed to be having. Harrow recognized that Graves knew that. Managing Harrow said, same as before. Right. A long exhale. Right. Well, stay by your phone. The official kind, not the one that's. I assume the other one is not usable. Hasn't been since Friday, sir. Right. Stay by your landline. Then, if you have one. I have one. Good man. A pause that had too much in it to be a normal pause. Good man. He hung up. Harrow stood in his hallway with the receiver in his hand for a moment. Good man. Not good soldier. Not good officer. Graves had been very precise about that, and they both knew it. Callum came on Tuesday. Harrow opened the door, and his brother was standing there in the same tracksuit, which meant he'd either worn it 3 days running or owned several identical ones. And Harrow had never in his life been interested enough in Callum's wardrobe to distinguish between those possibilities. I brought biscuits, Callum said. The good ones. The ones with the chocolate on the bottom. You don't have money for the good biscuits. I do now. A complicated expression. Crowdfunding. Apparently people have feelings about the story. Harrow stared at him. Don't, Callum said. I'm not saying anything. You're saying it very loudly. They went inside. Kettle on. The good biscuits on the table, still in the bag. Outside the window, the weather was doing the gray, relentless London thing that passed for a sky from October to May. Have you looked at the comments? Callum asked. No. Some of them are, look, most of them are good, Ed. Most of them are people who, he stopped. Started again with the precision of someone choosing words carefully, which was not Callum's natural register. There's a bloke. One of the comments, from a bloke. He says his father was on a veterans list for 6 years. 6 years. And his father died before the position came up. The kitchen was very quiet. The bloke says, he says at least someone said it out loud. Harrow looked at the bag of biscuits. That's the thing, Callum said. That's the bit that, his voice did something, pulled briefly to one side, corrected. Nobody said it out loud, Ed. For how long? Nobody in that building said it out loud. I don't know what it changes, Harrow said. Neither do I. Callum picked up his mug. But, it's different when it's said. It's different. The second call from the palace came on Wednesday. Different voice this time. An actual private secretary, full title offered at the start of the call, the precise diction of someone trained to convey significance without conveying emotion. The Queen requests to inform you, the voice said, that the Veterans Housing Initiative has been reinstated to its original schedule. It will proceed ahead of the Commonwealth Summit, not after. Harrow sat with the phone at his ear. Additionally, the voice continued, a review has been commissioned into the process by which the delay was originally recommended. That review will be conducted independently. He didn't say anything. He was trying to find the shape of what he felt, which was not what he'd expected to feel, which was not the clean satisfaction of a resolved thing. It was something more complicated and less comfortable than that. Something with more future in it. Sergeant Harrow, the voice said, uncertain now, the professional register cracking slightly at its edge. Are you? Yes, he said. I'm here. Is there anything you'd like me to convey in response? He thought about Callum at the table with the notepad of numbers. He thought about the word right and everything it carried. Just tell her, he said, that 347 is still a number she should know. A pause. I'll convey that, the voice said quietly. Yes, I'll convey that. He didn't get his post back. The conduct review ran 8 weeks and concluded with the kind of language that institutions use when they want to close something without fully opening it. Irregular conduct, breach of protocol, no further action at this time. A phrase that was technically an outcome and practically a door left slightly ajar. He was offered a desk role. Administrative. Same building, different relationship to it. He thought about it for 3 days. He thought about 19 years of standing still. He thought about all the things he'd seen from that stillness. The good things, the ceremonial weight of the institution at its most sincere, the moments where the crown had meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. He thought about those too, because fairness required it, and because the thing he'd done hadn't been a repudiation of all of it, even if the headline made it look like one. He thought about Callum saying good man was different from good soldier. He took the desk roll. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning, in a flat in Lewisham that smelled slightly better than it used to because the building management had finally addressed the issue on the lower landing, Callum Harrow received a letter. Headed paper. Official. Position 12, it said. Anticipated placement within 8 to 12 weeks. He read it twice. Then, he set it on the table next to his mug, and looked at it for a long time. Then, he took out his phone and called his brother. Ed. Cal. A pause. The kind of pause that was full of something neither of them was going to name directly, because that wasn't how the Harrows handled things, had never been how the Harrows handled things. The Harrows put the kettle on, and said right, and made do, and they did not cry on the phone, or if they did, they didn't mention it. Position 12, Callum said. I know. How do you know? I have a desk now, Cal. I see things. A silence. Right, Callum said. But, this time the word had different weather in it. Lighter. Still Callum, still understated, still constitutionally incapable of the full expression of a thing, but the weight underneath it was different. Harrow sat at his desk in the building he'd given 19 years to, in the civilian clothes he was still getting used to wearing inside it. And he held the phone to his ear and listened to his brother breathe. Right, he said back. Outside the window, London was doing what London did. Gray, relentless, going about its business without particular sentiment. Neither of them said anything else. Neither of them needed to. End.